I'm Nadia Jani and you're watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. The UN Security Council condemns Israel's preliminary vote to annex parts of the West Bank. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy arrives in Downing Street to meet with Britain's Prime Minister. And tensions sour between Canada and the US after Trump suspends trade talks over an anti-tariffs advert. Good evening. The UN Security Council has convened to review the fragile ceasefire in Gaza as diplomats debated the release of hostages, the delivery of humanitarian aid and ongoing tensions in the region. Key representatives from Israel, the Palestinian Authority and the United States addressed the Council, highlighting both challenges and responsibilities. Let's take a look.
As the ceasefire brokered by the United States earlier this month in Gaza continues under close scrutiny, the UN Security Council remains focused on balancing humanitarian relief with security responsibilities in both Gaza and the West Bank. Diplomats debated the future of the ceasefire, the plight of hostages, and the urgent need for humanitarian aid. Palestinian Deputy UN Envoy Majed Bamia said the Palestinian Authority must be empowered to fulfill its duties and that Israel's obligations also need careful monitoring.
The efforts to undermine the Palestinian Authority and its ability to perform its duties despite its full-fledged commitment to peace that has been put to test over the course of the last 2 years in unbelievable manners, aims at preventing our independence and our statehood. If there are requirements placed on the Palestinian Authority, it must be empowered to fulfill them. And Israel has also obligations that need to be monitored and implemented. We will not shy away from our obligations and from our commitments.
Israel's ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, responded, highlighting the ongoing hostage crisis.
Our struggle is not over. There can be no peace, no future, and no rebuilding of Gaza while terror still remains. 13 fallen hostages remain in Hamas's hands. We will bring them home and give them the dignity they deserve. The world must keep the pressure where it belongs, on Hamas, to return the hostages, to lay down its weapons, and to honor the peace plan it signed.
The US also condemned attacks on civilians and hostages, calling for global outrage over recent killings.
And for the global community that has been protesting and demanding peace for the Palestinian people, for the people of Gaza, where is the outrage? Where is it over these executions we've seen in recent days? Hamas is not just attacking Israelis. It's not just terrorizing hostages underground. It's not just using bodies as psychological warfare on families. They are openly killing their own people for propaganda, in addition to the human shields that they've used over the past years. And candidly, shame on the world.
Earlier, Israel's parliament has preliminarily approved a bill to extend sovereignty over parts of the West Bank, a move condemned by Palestinians and closely watched by Washington.
It's a move that was also condemned by US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who met Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem. The meeting was to review progress on the US Gaza deal implementation. The visit is part of an ongoing US-Israel coordination and comes a day after Israel's parliament advanced a West Bank annexation bill.
We've got to get through the process that we're involved in right now, which is making sure the ceasefire holds without anything disrupting it, making sure people are getting the life-sustaining aid that they need in a way that's not being looted or stolen or diverted in any way, and at the same time creating the conditions for the stabilization force to come in as soon as it possibly can be put together to provide what we need, the stabilization we need, in order to move to the further phases of this plan. Suffice it to say that we're also hopefully going to create conditions where Hamas won't have people, because there'll be ways. We want to see a Gaza where people can live without Hamas, where they have jobs, where they have prosperity, where they have opportunities. I'm not telling you that's going to be set up next week, okay? That's a long-term project.
But before they get there, the US said Israel needs to be comfortable with the countries involved in creating an international stabilization forces planned for the Gaza Strip, which is why Israel has blocked Turkey from participating. The diplomatic sources say Ankara had expressed readiness to send troops to assist in post-war recovery efforts, but Israel opposed the move, citing alleged political and ideological ties between Turkey and Hamas. Washington supported Israel's position, stating that the mission must remain neutral and focused on humanitarian tasks. Now to London, and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has met with Prime Minister Keir Starmer. During his trip to London, the Ukrainian president is also set to meet with other European leaders on a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, a group of European and allied nations committed to supporting Ukraine against Russian aggression. Britain is urging partners to use frozen Russian assets to strengthen Ukraine's hand in future peace talks and back measures removing Russian oil and gas from global markets. The British Prime Minister accused Putin of not being serious about ending the war in Ukraine and reaffirmed British support for Ukraine.
I do think that this week we can really bear down on Russian oil and gas. Huge steps forward this week already. I think there's further we can do on capability, particularly long-term, long-range capability, and of course the vital work of the Coalition of Willing when it comes to the security guarantees that are necessary. So we've got really important business to go through with the Coalition of Willing today, but it's very good to be able to welcome you back. It is very good that we are frequently meeting like this so that we can share the challenges and work them through, and we stand, as we've always stood, as your closest supporter and ally, and stand with you and all the people of Ukraine.
Oil prices have surged this week following new US sanctions on Russia's top two oil producers. Markets are seeing the strongest gains in months. The price of dated Brent oil produced in the North Sea increased by 5.4%. West Texas Intermediate oil rose by 5.6%. and Urals oil rose by 6.59%. Along with the price of a barrel of Azerbaijani oil of the Azari Light brand increased by 5%. The rise in oil prices this week followed new sanctions targeting Russia's two largest oil producers, Rosneft and Lukoil. Together, these companies contribute more than 5.2% of the world's oil output. Well, it's no surprise that Russian President Vladimir Putin has spoken out on the oil sanctions, branding them as an unfriendly act that does nothing to strengthen Russian-American relations. He also accused the US of escalating the conflict by allowing Ukraine to use long-range missiles against Russian targets. He warned that such actions would cross a dangerous line, saying Moscow is ready to deliver what he called a decisive response if its territory is attacked.
This is an attempt to escalate, but if these weapons are used to strike on Russia, the response will be very serious, even overwhelming. Let them think about it. The US president has decided to cancel or postpone our meeting. More likely, he is talking about postponing it. What can we say? Dialogue is always better than any confrontation, any disputes, or especially war. That is why we have always supported continued dialogue, and we continue to support it.
And it's not only with Russia where tensions have soured. All US trade talks with Canada have been terminated over an advert sponsored by Canada's province of Ontario, in which former US President Ronald Reagan says tariffs hurt every American. Trump wrote on Truth Social that Canada had fraudulently used the ad Earlier this year, Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian steel, aluminium and cars, prompting Ottawa to respond with its own measures. Negotiations on a potential deal had been ongoing for weeks. The Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation said the ad used selective audio and video of Reagan and is reviewing legal options. At this time, the Canadian government has not issued a comment. Efforts to stabilise US-China relations are gaining momentum, with new talks in Kuala Lumpur setting the tone ahead for the Trump-Xi summit. Officials from both sides describe the discussions as productive, signalling cautious optimism despite ongoing disputes over trade and technology. Correspondent Manur Makdoum reports.
Senior US and Chinese officials met in Kuala Lumpur this week in an effort to ease tensions ahead of the highly anticipated Trump-Xi meeting in South Korea on October 30th. The talks, led by US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and China's Vice Premier He Lifeng, come amid renewed trade friction as Washington threatens 100% tariffs on all Chinese imports and Beijing expands export controls on rare earth minerals. Both sides described the discussions as constructive, signaling an attempt to prevent a full-scale escalation before the two leaders meet face-to-face. The current phase of the US-China trade war, which intensified earlier this year, has shifted from traditional tariffs to battles over technology and critical resources. The US has tightened export restrictions on advanced chips and critical minerals, while China has retaliated with limits on rare earth exports, which are vital for global manufacturing. The Malaysia talks focused on these issues, seeking a path towards stability and a potential framework for future negotiations. There were previous trade talks held between the two countries earlier this year in Stockholm, Geneva, London, and Washington, but made limited progress towards resolving issues. Now, for both powers, the outcome carries high stakes. The US wants to project strength without damaging its own industries, while China aims to maintain engagement and assert its sovereignty. The Kuala Lumpur talks set the tone for the upcoming Trump-Xi summit, which could either mark a pause in hostilities or trigger a new wave of tariffs and countermeasures. Manu Mukhtar, A-News, Beijing.
At least 3 people have been killed and 12 others injured in an explosion at a railway station in Uvrich in northern Ukraine. Local media said a Kharkiv resident detonated an explosive device during a document check, killing a female border guard and 2 civilians. The bomber later died in an ambulance, the State Border Guard Service said. An investigation is currently underway. Welcome back to A News. Now let's turn back to one of our top stories today. The Russian oil sanctions that Trump announced earlier this week to pressure Moscow to end its war in Ukraine. It's now not only having an impact on the global market, but it's starting to impact its allies. India said it would decrease its Russian crude oil imports, and China has suspended purchases of seaborne Russian oil. Analysts say that a sharp drop in oil demand from Russia's 2 largest customers will put a strain on Moscow's oil revenues and force the world's top importers to seek alternative supplies and push up global prices. Here to discuss its impact is international and independent strategist Andrew Leung. Welcome. My first question is, the recent oil sanctions the US has imposed on Russia is causing key countries to change its buying habits, and it's exactly what Trump wanted. Could this tactic work to push Russia to a ceasefire?
For look at India and China, both countries have not responded to President Trump's demand to buy the Russian oil beginning. I mean, until a couple ago, that they have to accommodate President Trump. Now there are different reasons. China, of course, has been buying Russian oil for decades, well before the Ukraine war, because China and Russia's economies are mutually complementary. China is the world's largest energy importer, Previously, United States was also an importer, but now it's an exporter. It's a competitor for the Middle East because the United States energy sufficient and exports its energy. But China is still energy dependent. And then these economies are complementary with Russia. Russia is the world's largest exporter. Along with energy is agricultural products, and China, of course, is also the largest buyer. Now, this is not necessarily equate with the situation in India. India, of course, did not buy that much Russian oil in the beginning, but appeared to take advantage of this Ukraine war to buy cheap Russian oil on the cheap and stockpiling a great deal of them. So as Trump is now doubling down on the sanctions, on increasing tariffs to sky-high levels, and I think that India wants to show some degree of flexibility. It hasn't announced that it will cease buying Russian oil totally, but it's going to scale down its purchase. Now, China's situation is slightly different. China, of course, likes to also send a positive signal to Trump. Not that China is going to be succumb to U.S. Coercion, because China has now found a very effective stranglehold on the United States' Achilles heel, which is the rare earths. Its dominance and mastery of the rare earths processing and supply, controlling for some critical elements, nearly 98% of the global supply, which goes into all sorts of products, including F-35 fighter jets. So I think that China also, apart from its ability to withstand President Trump's coercion, also wants to send a positive signal ahead of the forthcoming meeting between President Xi and Mr. Trump. Now, there's another dimension on China's side, which is that half of China's installed energy capacity is now accounted for by green energy. Wind power, solar power has been growing by leaps and bounds in China for two reasons. A is because of the pollution of the environment, but the second, also equally important, not more important reason, is because green energy is homegrown. It's energy security, because importing a lot of energy through the world's choke points, including the Malacca Strait, even including South China Sea, was subject to interdiction by American military forces along the South China Sea, but also in the Malacca Strait, even in the port of Hormuz, through the Red Sea, posing a lot of problems. So I think on two fronts, China's pivoting towards green energy. Now the green energy installed capacity already exceeds 50% of China's entire energy demand capacity, installed capacity. So China is well able to buy a lot less oil. And that's what's happening.
And because of that, just staying with China's capacity when it comes to buying Russian oil and using more of its green energy ways and opportunities there, are you saying that China is actually able to pivot away from it a bit more successfully in regards to other people or other countries that are not able to do so as quickly as China has?
Well, I think that China is not entirely getting rid of coal. For example, the coal installed capacity is the world's largest. China does not rely on green energy alone, because green energy is intermittent. You can't rely on the sun or the wind. Even with storage capacity, it's not the same as steady energy supply generated by fossil fuel. But then it is not either here nor there, but it's a good mixture. But the idea that China will grow carbon neutral by the year 2030 or 35 is going to reach carbon neutrality by 2030. So China is now able to rely on its internal energy to a much larger extent, and therefore is well able to scale down its import from Russia as a good signal for China's intention to end the war in Ukraine sooner than expected.
And just with that, Putin has mentioned that this the Russian oil sanctions will put a strain on...
Sorry.
I'll just repeat that question. Just on that, can you still hear me, Mr. Leung?
Yes, I can now hear you. Yes.
Brilliant. I was just going to say, Putin has actually mentioned that this will put a strain on US and Russia relations. Could this also impact China's relations with Russia too, now that it's ceased some of its oil purchasing abilities?
Well, China has always been refused to listen to Trump's demand not to buy energy from Russia until now. So China seemed to be supporting Russia all along. But now, I think that Russia is now subject to pressures on all fronts. And I think the war has been dragging on, and I think China would like to show a bit of goodwill. But of course, China and Russia are still great partners. Particularly, Russia relies on China as its main, if not all-time friend, but at least much more better relations with any other countries. Because as I said, the two economies are extremely complementary. And I think that China could probably make up with the loss of the oil demand or oil purchases with buying more agricultural products from Russia, including soybeans.
Yeah.
I think that it's, at the end of the day, it's not cutting off the entire trade relationship with China. So I don't think it's going to impact hugely on China-Russia relations.
And just with the upcoming summit that you also mentioned that's happening with Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump, you mentioned that obviously China wanted to get into good graces with the US. Why is that important for China?
This Trump is now launching this all-out war, a trade war, technological war, ideological war, and then surrounding China with military assets in the first island chain, second island chain, allying China's allies, Americans' allies in Asia Pacific, including India and Australia, Japan, South Korea, Philippines. Well, China wants to have a peaceful environment. It's no good just thumping your chest and say, okay, well, let's see who is winning. And I don't think that's China's philosophy. I think they haven't shown resolve and ability to withstand Americans' coercion. China wants overall to maintain a productive relationship with Russia, with United States. After all, it's still the largest economy in the world. It's still dominant in various other fields, including technology, and to various extent the military. So I think that this nuanced, recalibrated relationship, on the one hand, both countries can cooperate, for example, on fentanyl, on even nuclear arm and containment, but both countries know that they are competing in various fields. So it's a healthy competition. I think that China doesn't mind healthy competition. What China objects to is unilateral and also arbitrary coercion using the rules of the jungle rather than the rules of competition as in the Olympics.
And Mr. Leung, very quickly before you go, seeing as Russia and China are quite close allies, do you think that what President Donald Trump is doing in regards to sanctioning Russian oil is going to actually push Putin to provide a ceasefire?
Well, President Putin has recently out in the open to say that nothing of that sort is going to push Russia towards a settlement according to American terms, because Ukraine is a huge security risk in Putin's eyes. It's never make known its concern about the erosion of NATO, pushing the NATO further and further towards its border. And has already made it quite clear that NATO cannot expand to Ukraine long before this war. But then, regardless of his warning, that's what happened. And the Ukraine has undergone a color revolution, changing its government and pushing the possibility of deploying NATO missiles right on its border. So that's, and also because Russia is a very powerful nation, it's not going to just bend according to other nations' will. And I think that Putin will continue to fight, and of course it's creating reasonable grounds in the Donbass area.
Yes, well, thank you so much, Mr. Leung. Your insights has been really helpful. Thank you for joining me, and take care. That's Mr. Leung. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories impacting the region. Armenia and Azerbaijan have concluded peace talks and are now making efforts toward the full normalization of relations, Armenia Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan has said. According to the Armenian media, Mirzoyan spoke to a panel discussion held as part of the 4th Ministerial Conference in Feminist Diplomacy in France. He also noted that peace is already established with Azerbaijan. He added that both countries are making greater efforts for full normalization of relations.
At this moment, share the belief that peace is the key.
Also during his visit, he met with Gerard Larcher, President of the French Senate. The officials discussed Armenia-France strategic ties and upcoming steps to strengthen cooperation. Mirzoyan briefed his French counterparts on Armenia's vision for the region's future in the context of achieving peace with Azerbaijan. The meeting ended with Mirzoyan signing the Senate's Golden Book, called it an honor to be hosted at the home of democracy and the rule of law. U.S. Senator Steve Daines says the route linking mainland Azerbaijan to its Nakhchivan Autonomous Republic, also known as the Trump Route, could unlock new trade and energy corridors across the South Caucasus. This includes the long-awaited Trans-Caspian gas pipeline linking Central Asia to Europe.
American negotiators came up with the innovative concept of the Trump Route, of course the Trump Route, for international peace and prosperity, or TRIP as it's referred to, that would connect Azerbaijan to its exclave in the Nakhchivan while creating a new trade route, of course, on the edge there, the Iranian border, that Armenia and Azerbaijan and other regional states. Today's environment offers a new opportunity to complete the last 20 miles of the long theorized Trans-Caspian interconnector pipeline, bringing Turkmenistan's 4th largest reserves of natural gas in the world, bringing that gas west through existing pipeline infrastructure and significantly reduce or potentially end Europe's reliance on Russian gas.
Now, turning to the sea that links 5 regional countries, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said that Moscow welcomes Iran's proposal to host the upcoming Caspian Sea Summit in Tehran next year. The meeting aims to strengthen environmental and economic coordination among the 5 littoral states as they face shared challenges in the region. Correspondent Tarar Shiralilu has more.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has expressed his country's agreement with the convention of the summit meeting of the Caspian Sea littoral states in Tehran on August 12, 2026. The date coincides the International Caspian Sea Day. Official IRNA news agency quoted Lavrov saying at the joint press conference with his Kazakh counterpart in Moscow on Thursday, during which he welcomed Tehran's proposal to host the event. The International Caspian Sea Day is an occasion observed by the 5 littoral states Azerbaijan, Iran, Kazakhstan, Russia, and Turkmenistan. On this day, the Framework Convention for the Protection of the Caspian Sea and the Environment from Pollution was signed in Tehran and came into force. As the largest inland body of water, accounting for about 44% of the total lake waters of the world, The Caspian Sea is facing environmental challenges, including shrinking water level, industrial pollution due to increasing oil exploration, and endangered wildlife. To overcome these challenges, the 5 littoral states have been required to protect the sea's ecosystem in this geopolitically and geoeconomically strategic transit route of Eurasia. In the latest development, Iran's ambassador to Russia, Kazem Jalali, was quoted saying that the first ever conference of governor generals of the Caspian Sea littoral provinces will convene in the northern Gilan province of Iran in November. Speaking on the sidelines of the provincial diplomacy conference in northeastern city of Mashhad, he also said that Tehran has been in contact with other Caspian Sea capitals to secure their agreements to convention of the summit in Iran. According to Jalali, it's expected that Russian President Vladimir Putin participates in the Caspian Summit next year in Tehran. Turad Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has appointed Nikolai Udovichenko as his special representative for the delimitation and demarcation of state borders with CIS countries, including the so-called republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. The decision has raised fresh questions about Russia's regional ambitions, with Georgia once again emerging as a focal point. Our correspondent has more.
At first glance, the Kremlin's new decree may appear to be a technical, bureaucratic move, but its implications are said to stretch well beyond border maps. By appointing a special envoy to oversee border delimitation with the self-proclaimed and unrecognized republics of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, territories internationally recognized as part of Georgia, Moscow is said to be reinforcing its political and administrative grip on these occupied regions. Many analysts across the region believe that the timing is far from coincidental. As Azerbaijan and Armenia move closer to a final peace agreement, Russia's traditional leverage in the South Caucasus has visibly waned. The withdrawal of Russian troops from Karabakh in April 2024, following the restoration of Baku's de facto sovereignty over the region and Moscow's declining relevance in the Armenian-Azerbaijani peace talks, have left Georgia's 2 breakaway regions as some of the few remaining vestiges of Russian influence in the South Caucasus, alongside the remaining strategic assets in Armenia. The Kremlin now appears to be redirecting its focus. For Tbilisi, this development carries both symbolic and strategic weight. The appointment signals that Moscow intends to reassert its relevance by formalizing control over Georgia's occupied territories. While Russia presents this as a routine administrative measure, in Georgia it is widely seen as a political message, a reminder of unresolved occupation and warning against deeper alignment with the West. Nini Nikolaishvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Uzbekistan and the EU are taking their partnership to a new level. Tashkent has signed an enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement, a landmark deal that expands trade, investment and green transition ties between the two sides. Our correspondent, Sevil Rajapova, reports from Tashkent.
Uzbekistan and the European Union are set to sign a new enhanced partnership and cooperation agreement, authorized by the European Union Council in October 2024. Negotiations began in 2018 and concluded in 2022, replacing the previous partnership agreement signed in 1996. The new deal expands cooperation across trade, investment, governance, digitalization, and climate action. According to the European Union, the EPCA will significantly upgrade the regulatory framework for trade and economic relations with Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan's bilateral trade with the European Union has grown significantly, from about $2.6 billion in 2017 to approximately $6.4 billion in 2024. The signing follows the first ever European Union Central Asia Summit held in Samarkand in April 2025, attended by leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan. At the meeting, the European Union announced a $12.8 billion global gateway investment package to strengthen connectivity, energy, and infrastructure across the region. Uzbekistan's deal joined the broader landscape of the European Union agreements with neighboring and regional states. With Kazakhstan, the European Union signed its EPCA in 2015, and it entered into force in 2020. Kyrgyzstan signed in 2024, and Tajikistan initialed its text in July 2025. Armenia's agreement with the European Union was signed in November 2017 and entered into force in March 2021. Meanwhile, with Azerbaijan, the European Union relationship is governed by a partnership and cooperation agreement in force since 1999. As a landlocked country, Uzbekistan depends on transit routes through Kazakhstan and Caucasus to reach global markets. This makes infrastructure and logistics key to the agreement's success. The EPCA offers Uzbekistan improved access to European Union markets and investment, while giving the European Union a stable partner in the strategic region. It is Sivil Rajapova reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan, A News.
Afghanistan's Ministry of Mines and Petroleum says a Saudi Arabian company has shown strong interest in investing in the country's oil and gas sector. It added that it was also interested in the Tapi pipeline project, which aims to carry natural gas from Turkmenistan to South Asia. Our correspondent Tamim Bahis has more from Kabul.
In Kabul, Minister of Mines and Petroleum Hidayatullah Badri met with Shahir Attaqi, the Chief Executive Officer of Saudi Delta International Company. According to a statement from the ministry, the Saudi company expressed its desire to invest in Afghanistan's oil and gas industries and in the extension of the Tapi pipeline project, a multi-billion-dollar energy corridor that would link Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India. The company also pledged to share its technical expertise with Afghan engineers. Afghanistan holds significant untapped reserves of oil and natural gas, mainly in the northern Amu Darya and Afghan-Tajik basins. U.S. Geological Survey studies estimate nearly 1.6 billion barrels of crude oil and over 15 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. But decades of conflict, limited infrastructure, and political uncertainty have prevented large-scale extraction. Both sides have now signed a memorandum of understanding to continue technical discussions, a potential step toward reviving one of Afghanistan's most underdeveloped economic sectors. If realized, the deal could signal a new wave of energy investment in Afghanistan, though analysts warn that stability and infrastructure remain key challenges. Tamim Bahis in Kabul, A News.
Welcome back to A News Now. This week, the EU brought together foreign ministers and representatives from EU member states, including Armenia, Azerbaijan, the Republic of Moldova, Turkey, Ukraine, and Central Asian partners. The meeting was to discuss the cross-regional connectivity agenda, whose aim is to link the EU with Central Asia through Turkey and the South Caucasus. The meeting follows the EU's strategic approach to the Black Sea region and the EU Central Asia Summit. Here to unpack the outcomes is political analyst Nikola Mikovic. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is, what were the key learnings that came out of the meeting?
European Union aims to strengthen its ties, political and economic ties, with both regions, with the South Caucasus and Central Asia. It's part of its strategy of the energy divorce or the energy decouple from Russia, because both regions they have significant natural resources, and as such they are extremely important for not only for Brussels but for member states, EU member states, which is why individual EU members have already signed several bilateral deals with Central Asian states, and Azerbaijan is a major nation in the South Caucasus. Now, if we're talking about today's summit in Brussels between Uzbekistan's president and EU officials, it's also very important because it allows EU access to Uzbekistan's natural resources. But not only that, they also discussed labor issues, because after Russia imposed restrictions on labor migration, the EU now seeks to get a number of labor migrants from Uzbekistan to come to work to the EU countries, which is another aspect of their cooperation. And I'm pretty sure Brussels will aim to develop similar ties with other Central Asian countries, with Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan as well, in the long term at least. For now, I think the major aspect of their cooperation will be energy.
Great. Well, thank you for highlighting those points that came out of the meeting. And just to basically go back on the Uzbekistan and EU partnership, where they have signed an enhanced partnership and cooperation deal. Now, I just want to focus in on that and just find out, what is the significance of that in general?
So that is basically the updated version of the agreement that they signed many years ago. And this document allows Brussels and Uzbekistan to upgrade the level of their current cooperation. So we could say now that they're strategic partners. Although from the economic perspective, for Uzbekistan, the EU is the third major economic partner. The first two are China and Russia, but still around 6 billion euro trade volume between the EU and Uzbekistan is, from Uzbekistan perspective, is a significant amount, and I'm sure they will seek to increase it in the coming years. This document that they signed also has two aspects in my view. One is political and the other one is the economic. So if we're talking about the political aspect, they signed the joint statement in which they indirectly support Ukraine. They never mentioned Ukraine, but they emphasized that they support territorial integrity and sovereignty of all UN member states, which is a formulation that the European Union uses in its meetings with other entities and countries. I think the reason why they didn't specifically mention Ukraine is because it would, to a certain extent, have an impact on relations between Tashkent and Moscow. But in the future, if Russia continues losing its influence in Central Asia, then I will not be surprised if Uzbekistan and other Central Asian nations, if they openly sign a declaration condemning Russian actions and if they side with the West. So that's the political aspect. And the other more important at this point is, in my view, the economic aspects of this cooperation. Because the EU, as I said, is eyeing to get deals on migration, but also on connectivity, because as you said, it wants to have a direct link to Central Asia. And in that process, Azerbaijan as a transit country will have an important role, but not only Azerbaijan, Turkey as well, and also Kazakhstan. So all Central Asian and the South Caucasus nations, which is why the EU insists on the further development of the middle corridor, which is a key route from their perspective, because it allows all regional countries and the EU to bypass Russia, which is for them very important now amid a new Cold War between the West and Russia.
Yes, and there seems to be now a lot of eyes on the South Caucasus and Central Asia. Do you think that's a good thing? And what can these countries gain from this partnership with the EU?
The EU already promised to invest in their green energy sectors. For them, I think that could be very important, because the EU is not hiding that it aims to transform those regions into producers of green electricity. So the point is to develop their green energy infrastructure so that they can produce the so-called green electricity and then export it to the European Union. It's a long-term process, and it requires a lot of investment. The EU has already started investing in their green energy infrastructure. China is doing the same, so China is indirectly contributing the EU's ambitions in the region. I think from the Brussels perspective, that's one of the key aspects of their strategy in Central Asia and the South Caucasus. They formulated it as a global gateway strategy, which is in reality the European Union's version of China's Belt and Road Initiative. But I think China is in a better position. It has significant advantage over the EU due to its proximity to Central Asia. But when it comes to the South Caucasus, I think the region is or at least it will be in the near future in the EU's sphere of influence, at least when it comes to energy.
And are there any challenges that need to be addressed for these ideas and agreements to be implemented, do you think?
Yes, I think so, especially when it comes to the oil imports, because the EU is in the long term interested in oil and gas imports from Central Asia, namely from Uzbekistan. But the problem is that the country became the oil and gas importer rather than exporter. So it will have to work a lot on the improvement of its energy infrastructure. But when it comes to Azerbaijan, the EU has signed several agreements with Baku on energy supplies, but the problem is that Azerbaijan can unlikely satisfy its energy needs, at least in the short term. Which means that the European Union's strategy does definitely have significant challenges. So Brussels will have to work very hard to find solutions. And in my view, in the midterm, it will remain dependent on Russian energy, and it will have to import both oil and gas from Russia, not directly, of course, but through third countries as it did in the past. But in the long term, I think Central Asia and the South Caucasus will play an important role in what I described as the energy wars between the European Union and the Russian Federation.
Well, that's really interesting to know. And so thank you so much for joining me and for the insights that you provided, Mr. Mikovic. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're now up to date with the world news for the hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News.